and we just hacked on cool stuff. Like it wasn't even related to our roadmap necessarily. Like we were just kind of like looking at different things in XR, things that we could do, things we could build. And we spent 5 days together. We brought 2 cases of wine, ate a lot of really great food, and just became a team, right? Like that was really the goal of that particular onsite. Other onsites have different goals, right? So the one we just did in December was in Vancouver, had the team that was remote. They all fly in. I've got quite a few people in the Vancouver area. So that makes it a little bit easier, but a whole bunch of folks flew in, they all stayed. We did a multi-day kind of like presentation. A lot of the organization, everybody has the power to provide their own insights, their own expertise. So lots of presentations for the team, what's going on, what they want to do, where they want to go. And then me setting direction on like, this is where we're at today. This is where we need to go this following year. That one was much more about alignment, right? So there's different types of goals that you might have.
I met a Rick!
Welcome back to another episode of MetaRick, where we talk about emerging technologies with founders, with large creative agencies, and with large global brands, mostly talking about XR technology, artificial intelligence, and the new era of the internet. Today's guest, I should have asked before we started, but I'm going to stumble right through it. It's Tony Bevilacqua.
Very close. Yeah. I mean, it's Italian and Bevilacqua, like drink water. Yeah.
Bevilacqua. What an awesome name. I love that. You
Yeah.
should have gotten into beverage and made a water
Apparently,
brand.
yeah. I mean, maybe that's the next startup, right?
But Tony's the founder and CEO of Cognitive 3D, which is a spatial analytics platform that gathers data from virtual and augmented reality experiences and turns them into these like actionable insights, specifically helping companies measure human behavior within these 3D simulations. Prior to founding Cognitive 3D, Tony co-founded and exited another startup that focused on revenue optimization and data analytics. So he's been around this stuff for a really long time. And I love that there's a focus on enterprise because that's where I sit. That's the stuff that I get excited about. Tony and I happened to meet at Industrial Immersive in Houston a little while back, and I couldn't be more excited. I think three-dimensional spaces open up a new way of tracking data and kind of understanding human behavior, understanding how our learning programs work, understanding how our client interactions and showcases work to a better extent than what we could through traditional two-dimensional experiences. So with that, Tony, I'd love to kick it over to you to just kind of tell us a little bit more about what Cognitive 3D actually is. Like, what are you focused on working on these days?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, Ricky. So Cognitive 3D is entirely focused on measuring human behavior and how people interact in 3D spaces. The company was founded back in 2015. As you mentioned, I kind of have a history in this category, specifically the analytics category, but more on the mobile side of the equation. So optimizing mobile apps, mobile games, those types of experiences. And through that experience, obviously got early exposure to what was going on in kind of the XR category. We really focus on what's going on inside the headset, providing visibility for developers to understand and quantify behavior within content, and then map that into whatever value proposition that they're after. We offer a Unity and Unreal SDK for any app developer that they could implement, and we provide a bunch of tools that are really centered around how to optimize and improve spatial experiences.
So incredibly valuable. As I mentioned before, this idea of tracking things in 3D, I think, is pretty different than tracking things in 2D. Maybe we could start by kind of comparing that. Like, what are some of the differences between behaviors that you can get insight into in a 3D environment versus the traditional kind of 2D mobile environments you were dealing with before?
Yeah, I think that I'd like to back up and talk about modality real quick. When we think about kind of mobile games and what we were trying to optimize at my last startup, it was very focused on optimizing towards a specific KPI, or like moving the customer, moving the user through a funnel, right? And so that funnel was usually optimized around, the amount of time they spend in the application, which usually was a driver around like a ad-driven business model, something along those lines. They also looked at things like they would want to understand like what it would take to get somebody to make an in-app purchase. What were the behaviors that kind of led up to that? But these are very linear applications, right? Like they had a very specific flow, very specific kind of onboarding that you would anticipate. And it was really easy to understand what step the user may have failed at, in a particular funnel. When we start thinking about immersive technology, you have to think about the user as more of a participant, right? They are somebody who has agency within the simulation, and they have a unique experience within your content in terms of how they comprehend it, how they move through that content, the value that we're ultimately trying to get them to. And so when I started the company, I immediately applied my mobile lens to this, and I'm like, all right, I know exactly what we need to build for this category. And honestly, we had to throw the playbook out within like 3 or 4 months because we really realized that like this is not the same problem. This is more like PC gaming and console gaming and free to play and MMOs, those types of environments, than it is aligned with mobile, even though it's a mobile form factor. And so we ended up building a whole new set of tools that are really focused on understanding how people are interacting in those environments. When we think about mobile, you're really trying to optimize on clicks, taps, and moving somebody through the funnel. When we start thinking about immersive technology and shifting into that participant, agency lens, gaze, position, what people are doing with their hands, how they move through space, what captures and keeps their attention. These are the important things within these environments, and they're fundamentally different than the platform that preceded it. So I think those are kind of the key differences, and not something that I necessarily recognized on day one. And I've been out for a while. I founded the company in 15 and took a product to market in 16. But it's it's a certainly a different type of profile, and I think that developers are up against a really significant challenge in creating realities for end users that are ultimately good quality, comfortable, and offer great immersion and application performance.
One thing that you said there that I always try to get this point across when I think about 3D immersive experiences is that a lot of people see this as very, very new and like so new and such a different change to what they're used to that they think it's like a full 180 on the direction that they've been going in. But the reality is, a more 3D and more immersive internet is kind of just a step in the next direction. Like nothing is started from scratch. These are all built on top of the building blocks of the past. So, when we think about like web-based 3D games, like what you'll see in like a spatial.io or with stuff that like Wonderland Engine is kind of providing a thing for, or development tools for people to create these web-based 3D games, that's like an extension of Flash games like cartoonnetwork.com or like addictinggames.com. And like, it's not a totally new idea. It's just another layer deeper of taking what was 2D, making it 3D. And so when you talked about how some of the playbook from mobile wasn't working, but there was some things you could take from PC gaming, there was actually some stuff already in the market that you could start to pull some inspiration from as you think about an in-headset experience. Maybe you could talk about how you discovered that, and some of the patterns that you were able to take from PC gaming into the
Yeah.
analytics of 3D
I think it
immersion.
was more about kind of the experimentation and thinking about like the types of problems that needed to be solved. I think that the first realization is number one, this is not linear. This is not a predictable outcome in terms of what we're trying to do. And so when you try to correlate that with mobile, it's like mobile usually has relatively predictable outcomes in terms of the behaviors that we're trying to optimize against. When we think about, free to play or like MMO games and some of these, really large environments, developers had to build tools and experiments to kind of optimize for these particular problems. And I had talked to a lot of developers, producers that were building content in those categories through my engagement with my last startup, and really realized that they would like access to these capabilities on these more traditional titles. And their path to get there was experimentation. Like, how do we import data into Unity? Like, how do we get behavioral data, put it in there, and make it available for developers? But the realization I had was really that it's very inaccessible then, right? Then the developer controls the path to data, which is counterintuitive to the types of stakeholders you have inside of an organization that actually care about this stuff and that want to make decisions with the data as well. I think developers obviously want to make better content, better experiences, but there's also product managers, producers, stakeholders, quality assurance teams that can all benefit from understanding how people are ultimately interacting in these environments. So I drew this like thing on my whiteboard back then. It was kind of like a half moon 180. And I drew a little line of like the user going into the 180 and then some gaze, kind of printed in the experience. And then I had then I took it to a designer and had them mock it up, and they put some zombies in kind of the environment, and then shaded in some gaze around it. And I was like, that kind of seems like the company. Well, didn't really stay true to that. When I started the company, we really focused on building kind of mobile tools. We started testing it with market, and it was like everybody seems to be trying to do that, and it doesn't really actually seem to solve the problem. So we ended up going out and doing a hackathon in Whistler back in 2016, and we took my whiteboard picture of this like half moon 180 environment, and it was like, what if we could overlay all the data into the environment so we could actually see the behavioral data in the environment that it was captured? And so that actually became the first prototype of our tool called Scene Explorer. And Scene Explorer has really been our flagship tool. It's the first thing that we built after we decided to throw away all the mobile stuff. And it really differentiated us from everybody else that was in the market that thought that mobile was the right way to go. We ended up building the Scene Explorer tool, and we're able to capture a lot of the market and demonstrate early value proposition because we could actually show the developers what's happening in the headset. How are people actually interacting with this content, which was completely like users had no visibility; they were just blind in terms of like what was going on in these experiences. And so we captured a lot of the gaming market, but more importantly, we also started capturing enterprise clients because of what we created as well.
So did you start with kind of desktop games, or was it VR games and then moved into enterprise corporate?
It was all VR initially, right? So it was a VR focused company, entirely focused on that category. I think the first devices we supported were Google Cardboard, Gear VR. Vive came out shortly after that. We didn't really ever support DK2, but that's really like where my inspiration came from of like actually jumping off the cliff and starting the business. Is that I had a couple of DK2 get dev kits, and we were building some prototypes around visualization. And that was really kind of a point of realization.
So
So yeah, we started off with those devices and then moved into like full tethered devices.
So some of the listeners are going to be like really XR legacy folks, right? Like a lot of the folks in my network are people that really are about this stuff and geek out about it. But there's also a lot of people in my network that are business leaders that are curious about XR, but they haven't necessarily. I wouldn't call them like an XR expert or an innovation team type of person. They might be more like a marketer, or like an HR executive or something like that. And so, for some of those folks that might be listening that are less into this XR space, maybe you could talk a little bit about the stage that XR was at when you guys started. When you talk about like the Samsung Gear or the Google Cardboard and like kind of where VR was then versus where we are now with things like the Apple Vision Pro and the newest Meta device and the Lenovo VRX and all these kind of new pieces of hardware. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the differences.
Yeah, I mean, we're all very lucky in terms of like where the industry is today, and that the folks that are involved in the industry today continue to invest over the years. And so I think that they've all laid us incredible groundwork to have a platform that we can actually scale and address not just scalable audience and consumer facing applications, but also in the enterprise category as well. Back when I started, I mean, it was all about mobile devices, right? Being able to take a mobile phone and slap it into a piece of cardboard and then hold it up to your face with your hands and kind of look through into the environment around you. This was a lot back in that in that generation of devices. Folks first kind of forte into virtual reality. I would make the argument that that wasn't necessarily a good thing for the industry because it didn't really paint a great picture on what the overall capabilities could be. Higher quality VR back then involved tethering, right? So you've got a cable coming out of the back of the headset, goes into a high end gaming PC, and so there was a barrier to entry in the quality of the optics, the capabilities inside the headset, and ultimately what you could drive with that headset. And so the value proposition, the accessibility of content, the accessibility of the device, all difficult problems that had to be overcome. You needed to travel basically with an entire suitcase full of equipment to be able to get somebody into one of these environments. Fast forward to today, you've got devices that are all in one that are, exponentially more powerful and more capable than what was available back then. And it's in the form factor of an all in one device with very little friction and easy to deploy. So from my perspective, starting back then till now, I mean, we have an incredible opportunity for us in that we don't have to deal with kind of these early problems anymore. Good quality optics, battery life, what the devices can actually drive, hand controller tracking, like these things did not exist back in the day. Like it did not start there.
Totally. No, I always tell people that there was a time when XR was not ready for me. And like, I'm an early adopter. I'm Meta Rick, man. I geek out
Yeah.
about this stuff. I'm all about it. Like, I spend my whole life on it. And even 7 years ago, when you had to get a Rift and have it tethered into a PC, at the time I was broke. It was the coolest thing I'd ever done. But getting a $700 headset and a $2,000 gaming PC
Yeah.
and a dedicated space for all of that, I just couldn't do it. It
Yeah.
wasn't until the Quest 1 came out and I could get an all in one mobile device for $400 that was almost as capable. That's when
Mm-hmm.
I hopped on board and became a full on member of the industry. And I think for other people, the barrier is even higher. And like
Mm-hmm.
they need a device that's even cheaper or even more lightweight. And
Yeah.
everyone kind of hops on the train at a different stage as the friction gets reduced.
Yeah, and more utility as well, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
think that in the earliest days there wasn't a lot of content, there wasn't marketplaces, there wasn't all the tools to actually find content. Getting an experience launch was, getting onto some wiki and a forum or something like that and following the steps, to try
Mm-hmm.
to like make it work, right? Nowadays, I mean, we've got access to stores just like the iOS App Store, and you can just download content and play it, or get into an experience and use it. And the friction is definitely not there. I think that this is going to kind of continue over time, right? Like as we see more and more content, more capabilities, consumers and end users, and then even enterprises are going to see more and more utility on, I'm not just going to invest in a headset for my company for one training experience. There's literally hundreds of things that my employees could do that are beneficial to improving them as individuals, as employees, as operators of equipment, whatever it might be. And so that's the level of maturity that I'm starting to see today, 2024 now. We're starting to see a level of multi-use within these devices, and enterprises are thinking a lot more about, instead of just building one piece of bespoke content, how can I use this? How can I license content from a large variety of content providers and provide a lot of value through that device instead of just one or two things?
Yeah, the biggest bottleneck I think is actually content, like improved hardware and improved capabilities and more developers. There's a lot of things that help improve the quality and the accessibility of experiences. But the bottleneck right now is just creating good content and updating and refreshing that content. So
Yeah,
as stock libraries get better, like Sketchfab and TurboSquid, and like provide these kind of pre-built libraries, as companies start to build their own processes internally, so that a 3D object is going to be just as common as like a JPEG or a PDF file, right?
exactly.
So we kind of got to get those supply chains up and running, and that's kind of in process right now.
Yeah.
I imagine the friction when you started versus now kind of changes the types of use cases and the types of personas that you end up
Mhm.
working with. When you first started, when there was this level of friction, how'd you get your first customers, and who were the customers that you were working with at the time?
Yeah, I mean, we in the earliest days we had kind of a bizarre go to market. I mean, like well, I had a bit of a misconception that the rocket ship was taking off, right? Like incredible technology, everybody's so excited, it was getting good press coverage. Facebook had acquired Oculus, and it was like, wow, like we've got really good investment coming in this category. I'm going to go and build Flurry for this space, right? I'm going to go out and build an analytics platform, a freemium product, and help developers build better stuff. And so that's what we did. We opened up the platform, made it super available, made it free, helped developers understand. But we were kind of at the end of the cycle in terms of the developers' first set of investments at late 2016, where we actually needed a seed round. And we really just couldn't afford to continue supporting game developers. They didn't really want to pay for Unity, let alone pay for Cognitive 3D for analytics. There just wasn't enough addressable audience for them to measure and find a ton of value. But what we did find is, like, when we look through the 500 plus folks that signed up, we started seeing like, Accenture and ExxonMobil and like all these other big companies that were using the product that we anticipated was going to be for games and consumer apps. And so we started looking at those use cases and taking a little closer look on like, okay, maybe we should pivot the business towards enterprise because these folks are finding value proposition now. And it was typically innovation groups, in the earliest stages in terms of the stakeholders that were kind of leading these initiatives into enterprises, showing them what the art of the possible was within the company, types of use cases that could benefit. The most sophisticated customers would want measurement, and that's where we really came into this. Is that there was clear visibility that these headsets had the ability to provide more insight into what's going on within a piece of content. So when we apply use cases to that, like training and simulation, I can leverage that data stream to better understand my trainee, how complete and compliant and competent they are within that content. Or as somebody who's working in consumer research, yes, I could visualize my building or my car, but I could also collect eye tracking data to be able to understand like what people were paying attention to, what captured their attention, how did they move around that space, those types of use cases. And so when we started to unpack all of that, the most sophisticated customers were asking for measurement, and we did a lot of POCs and pilots from 2016 all the way through to like 2019. Like we were primarily bread and butter focused on helping folks that were building projects and initiatives really see what the opportunity on the measurement side ultimately was for their organization. We didn't really see like that huge opportunity to scale until we got to COVID in 2020, when everybody started taking a really close look on, is this the solve for what's going on in the world today?
That's really interesting to hear the learnings from the early days. And then COVID, I think it's this amplifier, right? So all the companies like yours, like Arthur, where I spend most of my time, it's these companies started before COVID and they've been
Yeah.
around. And then COVID was this kind of amplifier that put a lot of grease on the fire, lit
Mm-hmm.
them up. And then some companies, I think, were really smart about staying lean and kind of thinking about this is a hype cycle. It's not a forever thing. And what comes next, right?
Yeah.
And the whole world is different now. Like I think hybrid and remote environments and like there's this new way of working that's been adopted post COVID world, and like this is a long term change that's happening. But there was also a lot of startups that were founded in 2020 that kind of wanted to ride that wave and then just disappeared.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious what your take is as a founder that came before COVID, experienced COVID, is now continuing to thrive post COVID. What are some of the changes that kind of happened and then faded versus what are some of the changes that you see sticking around in a post-COVID world in the way
Yeah.
that we
So
work or the way that we think about work?
Yeah, so one of the benefits in 2020 is that we had cash on hand, so we were okay. In the early days of that, and we're able to survive. But basically, from March is really when things kind of took a turn for the worse in terms of like what was going on in the world. But basically, from January through to maybe the summertime, everybody just kind of put a pause on everything, right? It was just how are we going to operate our companies? How does business continue with the lockdowns and what's going on in the world today? And so I thought that was for us, it was ice, right? Like we had absolutely no interest. All projects were on hold because if you think about like what happened, we measure content, right? So if people are going to build new content, new experiences, and adopt, my wave doesn't come till later, right? In terms of when that content is now constructed and now folks are trying to measure and demonstrate value from it. So for us, we had projects and initiatives underway that were able to kind of keep us moving. But at the same time, we didn't see that wave right away. Most enterprises, most business customers were focused on demonstrating those POCs and pilots at the earliest phases when code was going on. They weren't necessarily worried about the measurement piece, just the demonstration that it could be done. And so after that, the ones that survived, the use cases that really made sense and really resonated within these organizations, that art of the possible is now realized, then they were able to start kind of applying that and thinking about, okay, well, how do we do this at scale? How many headsets do we need? How do we distribute it? And you started seeing companies like Arbor, ManageXR, kind of appear and help solve in those particular categories as well. And so yeah, that was kind of my experience, is that we really didn't see that groundswell well until like 2021, when folks were really starting to think a little bit more seriously about how do we roll this out in a bigger way.
It's interesting 'cause it's what's starting to happen now is I think that we've shifted from there's like VR hardware and then there's experiences of like apps that you can download on that VR hardware. Now what we're starting to see is like there's a suite of VR software. Like you need a tech stack to run these programs. It's not just one software vendor, one hardware
Yeah.
vendor. There's a combination of things that you need and like these different niche tools, the same way that there is in a 2D SaaS environment, right? Like there are specialized tools that do different things. Manage XR, Arbor XR, great examples of that.
Mhm.
And I think that when a buying committee is looking at launching a VR program, they kind of have to think about these different tools in that stack. Is your buyer on kind of the brand side of the person launching that program, or are you more indirect where you're kind of selling into the software vendors or the agencies that launch those programs?
We do a little bit of both. I mean, we sell into the enterprises themselves with the promise of measurement, value proposition, ROI, right? So the most sophisticated customers, I want to talk to them directly. But the ISVs, the folks that are building the actual training content, the folks that are independent software vendors that are creating these experiences, working very closely with the enterprise, these are our partners, these are our friends. And they have better visibility on what's going on in the market before I do, right? My visibility begins once we have something and now we want to measure it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so my ISV partners have visibility on we've conceptualized something and now we would like to build it. And so these partners are really important to us. We have an ISV, initiative and focus, and we try to incentivize our ISVs and help them along in recommending and using cognitive, not just as for the customer, but even for themselves in building high quality content that people are ultimately going to want to use, with high levels of retention, good NPS, and all those things that go along with it. So I think it's both buying motions are important. I'm trying to break into the enterprises and make sure that they understand that we exist, what we do, and the problems that we solve. But the ISVs are also incredibly important to making sure that they have visibility on how they could make their content more valuable for that enterprise as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because there's like the order of decision making, right? Like people are solving a real kind of business problem, and measurement's usually not a direct solution of the problem. There's like another software that needs to come first that is the experience that either solves their collaboration problems or solves their training and onboarding experiences or like
Exactly.
whatever they need. And then cognitive 3D is then this amplifier that's like, hey, if you want to run these programs, you also want to one, measure the ROI and make sure that they're worth adding more investment or how much investment to add. So you
Yeah.
want to measure. And then
We
two, you also want to just get more insight into what's going
yeah.
on, right? And like make sure that things are working the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah, we look at ourselves as kind of like the independent analytics platform for the XR category, right? So we're the mixed panel, the amplitude, Tableau, however you want to look at us. That's our job is the measurement. And we've got a 17-person team that focuses just on measurement every day. How do we collect data? How do we store it? How do we visualize it? How do we connect it and make it valuable? We've got data science PhDs on our team that focus just on this one problem. And so that's one of the things that I've seen as a bit of a challenge in 2024 is that there was kind of a influx of all-in-one providers that were trying to deliver the holistic solution from MDM to all the way through to actually constructing the content as well. And I think that in the earliest stages of this industry, that works really well because you as the enterprise can sign one PO, you get the solution experience and headset, right? But as we both know, there are incredible developers all through this space that are specialists in every category. There's companies that do firefighting. There's companies that do forklift training. There's companies that really focus on, hard skills versus soft skills training. And what we found is the most sophisticated enterprises and customers are starting to think a little bit more about what is our stack? Like, what are we going to, how are we going to deploy not just with one expert in a particular category? How are we going to deploy with many content providers and many experiences to increase the utility of that particular device? How do I make it more useful for the rest of the organization, right? So, like, Arthur should be one of the things of many that can be done on that headset, it becomes hard to justify large purchases if that headset is only going to have one thing that users can ultimately do, and it's going to be harder to break into the rest of the organization.
Definitely. It's one of the things since I pivoted from just being the local VR guy to someone who works in VR, is just how welcoming the community is. Like I've talked about this on several episodes and many of my guests have addressed it too. It's like we're young enough as a space and we're excited enough to just get this industry off the ground that I think that competition's really healthy. And even direct competitors very often are very supportive of each other, because if someone's winning, then everyone's winning. Like
Yeah, absolutely.
we're not trying to cut at the same piece of the pie. We're all trying to bake a bigger pie, and I kind of love
Yeah.
that. Like it feels really welcoming. You mentioned something a second ago that kind of alludes to a question that I always like to ask founders and CEOs, people who are running businesses. Is you mentioned the type of skill sets or the type of personas you have on the team with like PhDs and data scientists and whatnot. So I kind of have two questions on this topic. One is, as the CEO, where do you spend the majority of your energy and your time running the business? Like, what's your focus? And then the second part is, how do you think about building a team? What are the type of skill sets and personas that you need to properly support you in building the business?
Yeah, so I mean, up until 2022, this company's been very small and very lean. I mean, we hired through to about five, six people, and maintained the company all those years, really focused on core engineering. And I was just kind of a jack of all trades within that team. So we've built a lot of technology over the years, and I kind of facilitated that, kind of Swiss Army knife within our organization. Fast forward to today, 2022, we did a Series Seed. So we raised $2.5 million from Convoy, Space Capital, and Boost VC. And after we did that, I needed to kind of change my clothes in terms of like what my role was going to be inside the business. It was more about scaling, more about building the team, and supporting their growth and being more of a steward in terms of like making sure that people have what they need and getting the hell out of their way. And so that's really what I've done. I hired a VP of engineering right away because, one of the things I've noticed within our organization is analytics is heavy, it's expensive. We use big kid tools in terms of how we do analytics. It's not a prototype. We use the same stuff that Facebook and Google and all these other folks use. Our data architecture is enterprise grade, and so it requires a lot of attention, lot of really fantastic skill set. And we were so lucky with the people that we found over through to 2022. But after that, once we started thinking a little bit more about how do we construct the org, then we started building the different groups, right? Instead of having somebody that works on data pipeline but all the rest of the stack at the same time, we started specializing, right? So now today we have a data pipeline team. We've got a backend group that deals with DevOps and infrastructure. We've got front end people that just do visualizations, WebGL, those types of things. We've got an SDK team that works just on Unity and Unreal. I've got a specialist on the developer evangelism side. He works just with customers and helping them install the SDK. We've created marketing folks that handle and talk about what we're doing. And now just recently, my role through that whole process was really going after the enterprises and soloing that sales process. Now just recently I've hired myself a head of business development to start trying to scale that motion within the company as well. Fast forward to this year, we will probably raise around this year in some shape or form. And so I think a lot about, setting vision, making sure that all my people have what they need to actually execute and build the organization, keeping us well funded, which leads into the fundraising piece, and then hiring incredible people and then getting out of their way, which I like to add to the end of that because, the main thing is like, providing delegation in those categories. So far, super excited, super fantastic team. Oh, I forgot to mention data science as well.
Mm.
We've brought in some data science people, and we dog food with our own data, and we've been building our own metrics and machine learning models and all sorts of things, which is a lot of fun. Um, so yeah, I mean, really, I'm trying to construct all the pillars, kind of around like what you would need to build a successful analytics company. And then, as we move into the next cycle of the company, we'll be scaling each of those roles, putting leadership in each of those roles as well.
So exciting. I love that. It's like gone from a lean team to being able to actually build out each muscle, right? Like a company has got each of these different kind of muscles or skill sets that you need to kind of keep getting to the next level. And like everyone loves that analogy of like it's like you have a box of airplane parts and you're falling off a cliff and putting the plane together in real time. I have a similar metaphor that I like, which is like it's like you're swimming and you start off butt naked swimming down a river, and then eventually you find some clothes on the beach and you pick up a spear and you make a couple of friends and you start learning how to fight sea monsters and you can take on bigger and bigger adventures. But
Yeah.
in reality, that adventure never ends. Like you're constantly
It's
innovating
a
and
very
pushing forward.
dynamic, dynamic world. Kind of building a startup. I find myself somewhat unemployable. Like I think that, it's something that I really excel in is building organizations. This is my second time around. I was running a basically product and kind of engineering for like an analytics company that focused on mobile. And again, in that, I kind of really learned the ropes of like what to do, what not to do, and then kind of took it into this company. Now as we move into the next phase, those pillars are all kind of established, and now it's a matter of like scaling and putting the right people in the right spots.
Totally. And when you
Yeah.
when you decided to start raising money, like how do you think about like when you go into raising money, what's like your checklist of things you think about when deciding if to raise, how much to raise, and who to raise from?
Yeah, I think that not everybody should race, right? Like it's really a question. It's not a predetermined outcome. So I think the question is, when you're talking to third party investors that are traditional in the venture sense, you need to be able to return their entire fund. They're looking at you as like, could this be $1 billion outcome, right? And so you need to kind of reverse your way into it and think a little bit like an investor on how do you answer all these questions? Is this a company that could go public? Like, is this something you'd expect to see on like the NASDAQ or, something along those lines, right? And so, from my perspective, I think that for cognitive, that this industry deserves a strong, independent analytics player that is, going to provide data and insights for the next generation of compute. So for me, the path for this to be $1 billion company is very clear, right? Like this organization will scale as we build up. Now, it's also about the stage of like where you are organizationally. Like you have to meet the criteria of like what investors are ultimately looking for as well, and that comes down to the maturity of like your customers. Are they in POC or prototype phase? Are they scaling? And it wasn't until 2022 that I really had good confidence that it was time to go out and actually do a venture round. Because once you think about doing a venture round, the fuse is lit, right? Like you need to go and do another one at some point, right? Or exit, right? And obviously, venture investors aren't looking for you to do an early exit, but um, you need to be prepared to meet your milestones and your goals within a predefined amount of time. We raised our Series Seed with an expectation that we would have 24 months of runway, right? And we've met that 100%. Now, what we've also done is we've gathered a lot of revenue, high margin revenue in that period of time. And we've been able to scale well outside of our natural size. Like we're 17 people right now. I wouldn't necessarily expect 17 people for a Series Seed company, but there's a significant amount of revenue there that needed to be supported as well. So we maybe move beyond our natural point of 8 or 10 people into that 17 category. Now, when we move into like a Series A or the next fundraising milestone, maybe our natural size is like 30 people, or something along those sides. But the real question you'd ask yourself is, can I get to a Series B, right? The next round in 24 months or less, right? And meet all the criteria I would need to get there. It's a treadmill, right? Once you're on the treadmill, you need to walk or fall, right? So I think that that's a question that founders need to ask themselves is if they're ready to get on the treadmill, or is there a more natural way? Can I dog food? Can I, find friends and family or other things to actually build the organization? There's plenty of organizations that have constructed themselves like that. I'm in venture because analytics is hard and it's expensive.
Yeah.
It requires a lot of people,
A,
and that's why I've landed here. Yeah,
that's really common for
yeah,
XR in general,
yeah.
right? Is it's a heavy lift, it's very capital intensive. It's a massive opportunity though, right? Like there's a huge chance at building essentially the next set of companies that run the 3D immersive internet the same way that
For sure.
Facebook and Shopify and YouTube and all these companies ran the 2D version of the internet. But that's really hard to do. Going after big problems takes a lot of effort, a lot of
Yeah.
resources to make happen. At your stage right now, like what are some of the metrics that you look at when thinking about like the health of your business and kind of tracking on if you're capable of hitting that series B or that reaching that scale that you see as a potential track?
Yeah, I look at our annual recurring revenue as probably like my North Star in terms of if we're growing or not. I look at the number of employees divided by our revenue as well, just to get a sense of like how efficient we are being with our capital. I also like to understand kind of our capital usage against revenue earned. So I want to understand the ratio of like for every $1 we spend, what do we earn from that? And so I think about those things a lot. I don't spend a ton of time on like cost of acquisition or any of those categories that I'll probably pay more attention to at Series A. But I spend a lot more time just thinking about like if we're being efficient with the dollars that we have. Are we seeing results from the money that we are spending and the initiatives that we are undertaking? And ultimately, is that North Star of recurring revenue growing or detracting?
And how often are you looking at those numbers? Is it like a daily routine, a monthly check-in, or how
That's every
frequently?
day, every
Yeah.
day. I mean, I know. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got a Slack channel for sales and all sorts of operations. We run the company like an open book, right? So, we all know if we've landed a new customer. We all know if somebody canceled. We all know if somebody left us a positive or negative review. So, I try to run the company with very kind of open, honest view. And when we go out and do like on-site or something with the team, and our team is fully remote, but we do on-sites on a pretty regular basis. Here it is, like this is where we are, this is where we need to go, like this is how you can help, as an organization, right? And so we run the company very transparently.
I love that. I think that
Yeah.
one that's like the future generation of employees. There's a lot of studies going around Gen Z caring more about transparency than any other generation. So I think that serves you great in the long run. But I also think in the short run, it creates more alignment faster. If you're hiring well and you're bringing in people that are about the vision and they're invested in the future of the business, like when any company under 100 employees, everyone's got to have a bit of a founder mindset of like, we're
Yeah.
in this for the long haul. Like it's going to take
Yeah.
some time to get this where we all want it to go. And so having everyone get more visibility into where the business is and how healthy it is and what's happening, I think that helps get that buy-in because everyone's a part of it. Everyone has that visibility. When you think about on-sites, I'm guessing that's part of the goal with those on-sites too, right? Is like to get everyone on the same page, to give a chance to build some company culture. How do you think about planning an on-site? Like, what are you trying to achieve with it? Like, what's an example of maybe a recent one that you did?
Yeah, we've done several since we did the funding. I think the first one that was really cool that we did was a hackathon out in Whistler, and so this was just to kind of reinvigorate after we did a whole bunch of hires, and so suddenly there's all these new folks, and there's just as many new folks as there was existing folks, and so now it's like, okay, let's bring these people together and become a team. We rented a like 15-bedroom house out in Whistler, and everybody stayed, together, and we just act on cool stuff. Like it wasn't even related to our roadmap necessarily. Like we were just kind of like looking at different things in XR, things that we could do, things we could build. And we spent 5 days together. We brought 2 cases of wine, ate a lot of really great food, and just became a team, right? Like that was really the goal of that particular onsite. Other on sites have different goals, right? So the one we just did in December was in Vancouver. Had the team that was remote, they all fly in. I've got quite a few people in the Vancouver area, so that makes it a little bit easier. But a whole bunch of folks flew in, they all stayed. We did a multi-day kind of like presentation. A lot of the organization, everybody has the power to provide their own insights, their own expertise. So lots of presentations for the team, what's going on, what they want to do, where they want to go, and then me setting direction on like this is where we're at today, this is where we need to go this following year. That one was much more about alignment, right? So there's different types of goals that you might have on when you're doing an on-site, what the purpose of it is and what your ultimate goals are. Something we really introduced this year is small regional groups as well. So we just greatly expanded our data pipeline team. Like it was literally just the house was on fire during Christmas. Like it was so busy. We got so much traffic like from Christmas, and like we're starting serving consumer applications, that on top of our enterprise customers, just like onslaught of traffic. And so it was really difficult, right? And so what we realized is we were like woefully understaffed in the data pipeline team. So we made some hires, did some reorganization, and then brought everybody together in Vancouver to kind of do a workshop. It's like, okay, let's debrief on Christmas and like what actually happened during the holiday season. What do we need to be ready for the next phase of growth, right? That was kind of more of like a team based on site. And then I'm going out next week to Toronto, and we're doing kind of a regional on site for all the folks that are in Toronto, Quebec, and then I've got folks in New Brunswick as well.
Amazing. I think that there's this idea of connectivity between employees that's really tricky in the new way of working. And it's a problem everyone's still trying to solve. Now, I'm biased. I work at Arthur, and we are a virtual collaboration tool that's all
Yeah,
about shared virtual 3D spaces where people can come together. And I think that that is a great solution, especially for large global enterprises with thousands of employees where they need to do this. Because if they want to do one of those on sites, I mean, it's a mission and a half. You might be shipping 300 people from 5 different
that's a lot.
countries with
That's
visas, and it's
Yeah.
a
I'm
whole
not.
thing.
I'm not there yet.
Um,
I'm not there yet. Do you guys dog food? Like, do you
oh
do
yeah,
VR? Yeah. Like, are you
oh
guys doing
yeah.
like stand up or like
I
weekly collab?
I haven't done an internal video call in 6 months.
When are you
It
going to move the pod
uh,
into VR? I mean, we need to make that happen, right? Like,
Potentially, yeah, we might get there eventually. I think, with the improvement in visual fidelity of avatars, I think that's going to be a key driver of something like that.
yeah,
I've thought a lot about the idea of like throwing this into like virtual spaces or something, like kind of bringing us into a 3D room. So even though we're not here physically, we can feel that way. I think that could
yeah,
be really exciting. Um, but we do dog food, like, and I think this is one of my goals for 2024, just personally, is like I'm trying to figure out why XR teams don't meet in XR enough, and I'm trying to
yeah,
push more XR teams to meet in XR more, because I think everyone's adopted virtual. If you're in this space, like if you're in this
yeah,
space, you have to, because I mean, you wouldn't believe in the tools you're building if you didn't believe that that's the direction the world is going.
yeah,
But there's a surprising amount of XR companies that still meet in Microsoft Teams or in Zoom for all of their internal calls. And I have to say, like, out of all the collaboration functionality and features that we've built at Arthur, the number one feature that we build around isn't even a real feature. It's just the sense of presence, of like
yeah,
the sense of being in front of another person. So the visual fidelity, the stability, like there's other quality of life things that might seem like not a big deal that add up to create a much better user experience.
hmm,
And so for me, I feel more connected to my coworkers that are all based in Europe and like different parts of the world, in Southeast Asia and kind of around different countries. I feel more connected with this team than I have in like two companies,
yeah.
like since Snapwire, when we were in this early stage startup in the same space, which is crazy. And I think after 6 months of reflection on like why that is, I think it's that fact that we meet in VR 4 or 5 times a week, and that's where that comes from.
That's awesome. You guys got us beat a little bit. We're doing twice a week right now on stand up. So that's the early morning meeting at the beginning of the day. And then we do a social time Fridays. And so that's, everybody gets together and kind of spend some time on it. A random app. We usually pick something that's multiplayer and get on
Love
there. We should
that.
probably get on Arthur too. So,
Yeah, yeah. We'll
but
talk about it. We'll talk about it for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, for sure. I mean, the ones I use right now are primarily customers. So we might need to talk about that. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, underrated. I have a group of people outside of Arthur that I've been doing little VR meetups with and stuff, and
yeah,
there's some simple ones, like even just golf, like
yeah,
taking, if it's not a lot of users, if you got like 4 people and you want to do a meeting, like
yeah,
hopping in golf and being able to have an activity while you're chatting that you can kind of play through,
yeah.
totally a doable experience to have a connected virtual, kind of
We'll have to
on-site
take that
almost.
one under advisement. That's a good idea. I did find that like when we did the Series Seed, I was kind of uncomfortable with how little folks were using VR, even in my own company. I was also uncomfortable with the amount of time that I spent in VR, right? Like
Hmm.
as somebody that's in this space as a professional and like building solutions and stuff like that, we should be very tied in with our audience in terms of like the problems, the challenges, the capabilities. But I feel like my own, like if I reflect on it a little bit, I feel like it wasn't until like Quest 2, Quest 3 that I was actually really comfortable with this being like a workable solution that was high quality enough that I wanted to spend a lot of time in. Now I've got a Quest 3 on my desk on a dock and I use it every day. And
This generation of headsets has changed everything. I think that
yeah,
with the quality of pass through, and then also the visual fidelity, like text doesn't get blurry anymore. Like that was a huge issue for me a year
yeah,
ago, even with the Quest 2 a little bit, was that text on PDFs just wouldn't be readable all the time, and it was hard to really present and share ideas. But with the Quest 3, with the Lenovo VRX, with the Apple Vision Pro, like this whole generation of headsets, the HTC XR Elite, it's the visual quality and what you get out of the experience has gotten so much better. And I'll say this too, like you kind of miss opportunities to really feel the value if you're not doing it all the time.
mm,
So I just had I can't say the specific client, but I have a client that I've done 3 or 4 meetings in VR now. We haven't even closed anything, right? Like this is us doing the sales process, is
yep,
bringing them in. The first demo was just to walk them through it and be like, hey, this is the high level. This is how you move around. This is how you move an object. Like you got to really slow things down for people to get them
mm-hmm,
used to how to use the space. And then by call 3, like earlier today, actually, we're in the space and we're brainstorming what a pilot project might look like. And as we're brainstorming, the way it's happening is they're talking to me and they feel like they're just standing there talking to me, and they're sharing all these ideas of what the room should look like and the features they want to showcase, the stakeholders we're meeting with, all these different things. And while they're doing that, I'm typing up notes and I'm moving them around the room onto pin boards and visualizing out as they're saying everything into a 3D environment
mm,
so they can see their own ideas in the room. And
yeah.
he had to interrupt me halfway through and he's like, can this be the demo? Can we just do this with them? Because I feel like this is like the most productive meeting I've ever had.
Yeah,
And that's where I try to get this across to people that VR does parallel some of the value proposition of an in-person office,
yeah,
but it actually goes a step further. Like now there's no real world physics. Now you can do things you could never do before. And kind of tying that back into the analytics piece, it's difficult to quantify the value of that. It
mm-hmm,
feels more valuable than a Zoom call for sure. It
mm-hmm,
feels more valuable than an in-person meeting for sure, in some ways, not in all.
mm-hmm,
But quantifying how much more valuable and what's that
mm-hmm,
worth and how much
mm-hmm,
should I invest in that program, those are more difficult questions to answer. And I think at this
mm-hmm,
stage, it's a lot of kind of test and learn. And there's some hard cost savings around travel and things like that that can help justify and figure out the right ROIs. But I
yeah,
think what you're doing and the platform that you're building helps answer those questions.
yeah.
It gives a lot of potential to start tracking. So tying it
Yeah, it
back
provides
into,
a quantitative data stream. Like you get literally like the behavioral data would happen within the simulation, right? How many people showed up? How much time did they spend in there? What did they do? Where did they spend their time? What resonated, like those types of things. And I think that that can always be helpful to build any type of value proposition. If you don't have the signals, then you don't actually know what's going on. Even just the basics, like some of our bigger enterprise clients are collecting like MPS and like exit polling data and like all sorts of stuff using our tools
Mhm.
inside the dashboard. And now they have a data stream of like tens of thousands of like NPS scores coming through daily, and it's like, wow, like this is like really incredible. And we know exactly how people feel about it and have real feedback and stuff like that. Like just having the basics like that is an incredibly powerful thing to scale an initiative.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And but by the way, do you have a hard stop in 2 minutes here?
No, I'm good.
All right, we might go just a couple minutes over. I'm really enjoying this conversation. It was great meeting you for a few minutes a few weeks back, but now hearing more about your story, I'm like even more excited to keep chatting a little bit. But one question I have to ask anytime someone works with data, the way that you work with data, has anything surprised you? Have you, because you have access to so much information on how people use 3D spaces and how they behave. Have you seen any data points that were either shocking or just especially interesting, that you
Hmm.
now learned about human behavior through your data?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me about privacy, which is a topic near and dear to my heart. But in terms of like surprising stuff, the data stream of behavioral data can be used for so many different things, right? Like customers are always asking us for human things from these experiences, right? If we circle back and say, okay, users are not users, users are participants, users have agency, we're building simulated realities, we're not building apps. right? Like, what does it mean to create an effective space for an individual to enjoy as a participant? Um, you start getting into ergonomics. You start getting into, was the user sitting versus standing? We get into, how did they use their arms? Did we make them uncomfortable? Like, there's just so much that you can unpack, and there's so much academic paper and insight. And this is really like the additional value proposition of bringing on a data scientist, and really, like, the PhD we have on staff, her name's Nikki, and she's a cognitive psychologist, and she has that academic background of eye tracking and other types of insights. Cognitive 3D, like, cognitive psychology is an interesting category for us. I do not doubt that we will have people that work in kinesiology on our team at some point, thinking about human factors and how people move and what's comfortable, what's not, ergonomic posture and strain, and all these different types of things. They all lead in. Like, our comfort score is absolutely predictive of the amount of time that a user is likely to spend within the headset. If you have a low comfort score from Cognitive 3D on your app, you're more likely to spend less duration within that application. And same thing goes for our immersion score. We started looking at like all the different inputs of immersion. We've got detractors, like, if you're hitting the boundaries of the guardians constantly, and how you're consuming your physical space versus your virtual space. And there's lots of different things that can kind of like drive immersion. And there's a whole academic vernacular that like wraps around that. But our scores, if you have a good presence score, you have better retention, right? So if you can get those numbers up, your retention is likely to get better. If you can drive up your comfort score, they're likely to spend more time, right? So this stuff works. It's just a matter of like there's so much depth of measuring humans. It feels more like, more academic and very like focused on how humans interact than it does, any other category of work I've ever been in.
What defines those, or what informs those scores as far as like how you measure comfort versus immersion?
Yeah, so these are scores that we've developed internally. So we've got a large kind of academic database of all the different types of papers that inform comfort, and we've picked some to inform our score, right? And then we've used those papers to determine the types of data that we need to collect to underpin that. And some of it we already have, like 10 times a second, we're collecting pose and posture of the user's head, what they're looking at with their gaze, potentially even eye tracking. In some use cases, we're looking at their hands. You can extrapolate that to try to figure out like what their arms look like with the hands and the position of them. I can tell you if we've got low ergonomic comfort on your arms, medium or eye discomfort within your arms as well. There's just so much that you can do with just these XYZ coordinates of data, that we can boil it into a score and make it actionable for a developer. The challenge that I see for developers is that if you're building a mobile app, a couple folks could just go build that in a garage, and it's like, all right, cool, we're going to build this mobile app, we'll ship it. Creating a reality that's comfortable, that people are going to enjoy, that's a category of work that has researchers, that has like the human element of what it means to create a reality. And so we're trying to boil down that category of work into something actionable for a developer, so they don't have to be kinesiologists. They don't have to be cognitive psychologists. They don't have to understand what it means to have bad pose and posture, just the fact that they're eliciting it from their user, and they should probably not. Like, that's ultimately what we're after.
I might have a use case for you, and you might already
Okay.
do it.
Yeah.
I don't know, but do you do much with commercial real estate?
Yeah, so AEC for us is a pretty significant category. We do wayfinding, signage, pre-build visualization, those types of things. And just keep in mind, we don't build any content at Cognitive 3D. These are our customers that have brought stuff to us, right?
Totally.
Where we provide value proposition is like, okay, we've got our pre-build. Where did they go? What did they see? What caught their attention? Where did they spend time? Did they pay attention to the $500,000 fountain in the lobby? Those types of things.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you guys can give a lot of great advice, almost consultatively to the developers that are building those experiences of like, this is the type of stuff that you could be tracking with our tools for those use cases or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we do some outbound and trying to find those use cases. ISVs often surface us opportunities because they're building the visualization or whatever it might be, and they see the opportunity for the measurement. And they don't want to build that themselves. So I think that there's opportunities there. We do provide consultation via our data science team as a professional service now. This is something that just evolved in the last like 6 to 9 months or so, where we're actually providing some additional insights. But we try to make the platform like as self-service as possible. Like the dashboards are easy to understand. You can pull the visualizations up in a browser. You're not putting up on a headset or anything, so it's highly accessible.
Soon enough, that service will probably be an AI agent of some kind that's
Yeah,
able to help out.
eventually. You know what's kind of funny about that is, we do a lot of analysis for customers at this point, and one of the things that we noticed recently is that each analysis seems to be a little bit different depending on like what the content is and the modality of how you consume it, the types of interactions there might be, and things like that. I almost feel like the AI is going to assemble the dashboards for us. It's not necessarily about finding the insight, but maybe finding the needles in the haystack that are different than all these other apps. Like if we're going to calculate hundreds of metrics or hundreds of things that might matter for humans, here are the five that matter in your app. Like I think
Hmm.
that that's the thing that might be interesting versus like just prompts. Like, why is my duration low? It's like, well, it could be a lot of different things. Uh, you know, we might want to just surface like the things that we see as different than a more successful application.
Makes a lot of sense. I
Yeah.
it sounds like you already have some work with the commercial real estate use case, and specifically, it sounds like a lot of use cases are coming from the developers and the partners that are building using your tool, like building the experiences and needing to track things. The
Yeah.
reason I thought of it was because we worked with Bear at Arthur. There's a great talk from AWE last year
Nice.
where they create digital twins and then have employees come through the offices to have a better sense of like how they want to lay out the office and like how they want
Yeah.
certain things to look and feel to be more comfortable, to be more productive, to be a better environment for their employees.
Hmm.
And so being able to do that in a digital environment first before setting it all up physically and get that feedback from employees just cuts down a lot of steps. It like makes it a lot more efficient for them. And I imagine
What
the data
resonates?
tracking
Yeah.
comfort could be an interesting kind of layer to a use case like that.
Yeah, for sure. And just the practical elements as well. Like, we've done like public spaces as well and like train terminals, airports, those types of use cases. And even just wayfinding and signage, like, does the signage, is it colorful enough? Does it capture the attention? And just tasking folks, right? It's like go find the washrooms and then, dropping them in an experience and seeing if the signage is more effective from control A versus control B.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now, this is a little bit unfair because I know that we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. So this topic probably warrants a lot more time than we're going to be able to give to it. But I would feel irresponsible not asking the question after talking about data and analytics. I imagine privacy and security and like what's tracked and what's not tracked for large enterprise is probably a really sensitive topic,
Yeah.
not just for the brands that build the experiences and but pay for them, but also for the hardware and like what they can track and what they're willing to track. Maybe you could talk to me a little bit about how you think about that as a blocker and just your perspective on the privacy and the security of the data that you're helping analyze.
Yeah, I mean, we have an enterprise level posture at Cognitive 3D. We've got, SOC 2 compliance, we're audited, we do pen tests and all those types of things. And, when I raised our funding back in 2022, the investors are like, all right, cool, what are you going to do first? And I'm like, I'm going to do a pen test and an audit. And they're like, what? And I was like, listen, this is an analytics company. We're collecting behavioral data on employees and how they're interacting in space. Like, this is actually priority number one. This treating this stuff seriously is going to create better, more effective selling motions and more confidence with our customers when they know that we are a trusted enclave to be able to collect this information. Now, when it comes to employee data, I think consent is really important. And so it also comes down to the type of data that you're going to collect. When we started the company, I thought that eye tracking, biometrics, like all this stuff was going to be the most important thing. But the reality is that the more basic behavioral data is actually the most important for the majority of enterprises. And it's only when you fall into more sophisticated use cases like law enforcement, where, maybe situational awareness, or, did the user, or did the officer have full understanding of the space before they took action, is an actually important thing that you need to measure with specificity and precision. Same thing goes for a pilot inside of a cabin depressurization. I might want to be able to understand, like, did we look at our checklists and comprehend that before we started taking action, because that's where mistakes get made, right? And so ultimately we know these things and we can leverage these types of tools. Now, the majority of enterprises don't use this for that. They use us for primary data collection. They provide us for after action review, so one-to-one replay of what users did and how they behaved. We connect into learning management systems and tools. Some customers don't keep all the raw data. Some customers don't even identify end users. They don't actually know who's in the headset. They just want to know how the headset's being consumed. So it really kind of comes down to what the organization's posture is in terms of data, and then their ultimate goal with the data. Are they trying to make the content better? Or are they trying to connect outcomes? If you're going to connect outcomes, you need to know who people are. I find more friction on this with European companies than I do with US ones. US companies seem to be more um, accepting, I guess, to collect data from employees, but we obviously have things in our contracts that require our customers to collect that consent in one shape or another, via employment agreement, specific written consent, whatever it might be. One of the ways that we've addressed this with Cognitive 3 is we've got something called the XR privacy framework. And I like to talk about this on pods because I want other people to use it. The XR privacy framework, it's xrprivacyframework.org. It's kind of like a do not track framework. Back in the mobile days, there was this whole discussion around, like, there should be do not track signals that you could just turn on and it turns off all the analytics tools and things like that. Well, all the analytics companies decided that, because there's no standard, we're not incented to create one. We'll just won't create one, and we'll just say, there's no standard, so we can't really do not track. We created it, we built one, and so this pops up a window at the beginning of the experience that says, hey, developer so and so is interested in collecting the following data points for the following reason. Do you consent? Do you not? And then that turns on the signals or not on Cognitive 3D. I'd love to see others, adapt and use it. Hopefully, other analytics platforms in the future will use it as well. But if you do send us an XR privacy framework signal to our SDK will listen and turn off data collection. So that's been kind of our path so forward, is making sure that we provide the tools where privacy can be protected.
That's really cool. It's like this is a topic that comes up a lot when we talk about Web 3.0, and XR kind of falls in that umbrella. I think Web 3.0 has kind of become a crypto thing at this point. I used to use
Yeah.
it more as like an umbrella for metaverse, AI, Web 3, all of it, but now I think it's more kind of associated with crypto and NFTs and blockchain stuff.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's this concept of like, let's learn from our mistakes. Like
Mm-hmm.
we created the internet quickly, it took over the world, and now is integrated into everything we do. How we access our money, our healthcare records, everything is tied into the internet at this point. But did we do it the right way? Maybe in some ways, and then in other ways maybe we made mistakes. And
Yeah.
in this kind of evolution that's such a big shift, maybe there's opportunities to learn from those mistakes and kind of rebuild a 3D internet in a new way that's a little different than how we built the 2D internet. So I kind of like when I hear builders in the space come up with ideas like that. I think it's a really interesting one, and we'll throw a link to it in the description as well for
Yeah, I
sure.
appreciate that. I did want to point out, like, there is possibility in this category for ill intent, just like any other platform before it, right? Cognitive 3 doesn't have that. We're trying to build better content experiences. If you look at our privacy policy, very focused on providing developers insights and visibility on how to build better stuff. We're not in the advertising category or, any of those types of things either. So I think it's really important that, this is not going to be a topic that is just one time. It's going to be over the entire life of this particular computing platform, because there is possibilities for these types of data to be collected.
Oh yeah, and you're going to have to deal with much harsher interview questions on the topic, I'm sure, as the company
Yeah,
continues getting bigger and you end up in different audiences. It's going to be a topic that never goes away. It's only going to get
for
more
sure.
intense. This is great. Thank you so much for hanging in for an extra few minutes. I loved hearing about your story, Tony, and I'm excited to continue to follow along in your journey. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to plug as far as stuff that you're working on or where people can find you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a developer that's building in this space, definitely check out cognitive3d.com. Our SDK is free for all of our baseline features and capabilities. And so most developers that are early on in the development process are able to actually use the platform completely free. And we really focus on those key pillars: quality, comfort, presence, performance, right? And you can get turnkey visibility on each of those things just by installing the SDK. So I welcome you to do that and give us some feedback. We want to make it better.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tony. That's the pod.
I met a